Old Testament reading comes from the book of Isaiah, chapter 12. If you'd like to follow along in your pew Bible, it can be found in the Old Testament, page 641. Thanksgiving and praise. You will say in that day, I will give thanks to you, O Lord, for though you were angry with me, your anger turned away and you comforted me. Surely God is my salvation. I will trust and will not be afraid. For the Lord God is my strength and my might. He has become my salvation. With joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation, and you will say in that day, give thanks to the Lord, call on his name, make known his deeds among the nations, proclaim that his name is exalted. Sing praises to the Lord, for he has done gloriously. Let this be known in all of the earth. Shout aloud and sing for joy, O royal Zion, for great in your midst is the Holy One of Israel. This ends today's reading of the Old Testament.
Next scripture reading comes from Luke's Gospel, following the lectionary, again continuing with the theme of Luke and what he's written, chapter 21, verses 5 through 19. When some were speaking about the temple, how it's adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, he said, as for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down. And they asked him, Teacher, when will this be, and what will be the sign that this is about to take place? And he said, beware that you are led astray. For many will come in my name and say, I am he. And the time is near. Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified, for these things must take place first. But the end will not follow immediately. And then he said to them, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and plagues, and there will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven. But before all of this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to the synagogues and the prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. Now, this will give you an opportunity to testify. So make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance, for I will give you words and wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, by relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but not a hair on your head will perish. And by your endurance you will gain your souls. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So the hustle and bustle of the temple courtyards was typically not a very quiet place. The murmur of the hundreds of simultaneous conversations made it difficult to converse and concentrate, let alone to think. So as one walked about the site, taking in the gold-plated decor and the glistening statues strewn about the temple, one got the feeling this was no ordinary worship space. However, throughout the various parts of the temple grounds, people would see areas of either ruin or construction, wondering if it would ever be completed. I'm sure it's very much like the modern-day I-4 that we have gracing central downtown Orlando. So this naturally provided even more opportunities for concern or worry and conversation. Yet King Herod, after seeing the temple in ruin and decay from many years of use and perhaps mistreatment, felt there was an opportunity presented to him, a chance to restore the temple, which would potentially grant him great favor with the Jews. So he went to great lengths to ensure the temple was a fancy, opulent, and done up as much as his coffers would allow type of place. And now imagine the one person that Herod would most likely not want anywhere near that newly minted temple space. And that would be, of course, Jesus Christ. But nevertheless, the scene is set, the lots are cast, and Jesus enters the temple. He begins talking and preaching to others. He then offers some very real and very valid concerns and warnings. Now, this seems to adequately sum up the scene of Jesus at the temple, with others anticipating what he would say to them. If there was one person that had the ability and authority to quiet a crowd to hear his words, other than maybe King Herod, it was, of course, Jesus Christ himself. So word had been traveling rapidly over how this new hero had been wandering around the world, curing the sick, feeding the hungry, loving the poor, the outcast, and the marginalized. And now was the listener's chance firsthand to hear what the humble and curious Jesus might have to say to them. Well, as it was, he did not seem to waste any time and immediately began addressing some of the comments, questions, and concerns of others. He begins with a strong word of caution. So for us, and with Christ's own warnings, we must decipher just what exactly he might be trying to say. It's critical that we heed the warnings he has provided to the disciples, the listeners, and even to us. You see, most of us know, if we're somewhat familiar with the Gospels, that Jesus spoke quite a bit. And when he spoke, people often listened. And so we should listen to the words that he uttered a 1,000 years ago. Yet words that are still true and ring very dear to our hearts this year in 2016. The very first admonishing offered was in regards to the initial distraction that caught the disciples and many other temple goers off guard. You see, most upon their entrance into the temple marveled at the ornateness of it and its sheer opulence. For a little background, here's some information regarding King Herod's lofty ambitions with the temple. According to many commentaries, the magnificent temple in Jerusalem during the lifetime of Jesus was the result of a rebuilding project by King Herod, started by him in 19 BCE. So Herod more than doubled the size of the Temple Mount. People could gather in large colonnades or porches around the Temple Mount for various purposes, including speech-making and healing. So while the temple itself was completed in 18 months, work on the other courts and decorations continued throughout Jesus' lifetime until 62 or 64 CE. So then, less than a decade after everything was completed on the Herodian temple, it was destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE. So the descriptive language in Luke chapter 21, verse 5, exhibits widespread knowledge of its beauty and magnificence. So after its destruction, people knew about its magnificence all over the world and all the way back to Rome. As a result of the exhibition of the plundered furnishings and the large paintings of the events of the Roman siege, and the burning of Jerusalem that was paraded on wagons in a triumphal procession in Rome in 71 CE. Now, this temple and its splendor and opulence was under construction for a good maybe 81 to 83 years. Yet it was destroyed in a matter of months, after only having been completed and enjoyed by others for about 17 to 20 years. So one has to ask, was all this investment of time, money, and effort worth it? Or should all of these resources have gone to something else? Or even that brief time that the temple was enjoyed and appreciated, was that time worth it? As an old Florida grower saying goes, or at least I think it's an old Florida grower saying goes, was the juice worth the squeeze? So with that being understood, it's probably a good thing that in this church, TPC of course, we have people that are such wonderful stewards and overseers of our own finances. Unfortunately, that means too that no, we won't have gold-plated doorways or platinum trim windows or newly minted diamond fixtures on our new sanctuary lighting. I'm sorry, that just can't happen. But since this is Pledge Commitment Sunday, it certainly helps to have that reassurance that whatever our finances or resources we might be pledging and dedicating on this day will all go to a worthy and worthwhile cause. You see, there's so much that we're trying to do both within and outside the walls of our own temple that it often takes a decent amount of resources to accomplish all that God is calling us to do. But if Christ were to visit us today, I'm sure that Christ would be very well pleased. Yes, we have beautiful stained glass windows, which you can see, but it's nothing quite like that of which would be found in the walls of Herod's temple. Besides, the goal of those is not to connect us, or is not to just have them to display them, but to connect us closer to God, and to make us more aware of what we might find in Scripture, or what we hold up to be the ultimate authority. You see, what we have is both very humble and very great. And naturally, though, there's always room for improvement or growth or additions. So distracted in the sense that we lose focus on what God is calling us to do is not something that we can allow to seep in. You see, we must remain His faithful disciples. And a lot of those distractions can come in many different forms or shapes or sizes. For example, in Miami, Florida, there used to be a preacher, and I use preacher in quotations in my actual sermon, who goes by the name of Jesus Christ. Now, I'm not sure if he was actually born with this name or changed it somewhere along the line. Nevertheless, he does not shy away from the fact that he believes and asserts that he truly is the Son of God. He claims he is Jesus Christ incarnate, returned and here to help and heal us all. Now, aside from the grand heresy he is committed of falsely proclaiming that he is God's Son, which is actually in violation of some of the oldest laws in the Ten Commandments, he's also falsely misleading others. You see, the sad truth is that a good number of people in this world are either naive or desperate enough for help, and sometimes maybe even both. But to be preyed upon, and that's P-R-E-Y, not P-R-A-Y like I do for you. It's preyed, the wrong preyed. But being preyed upon by a leader is both egregious and detrimental to the well-being of those being led astray. It does no good in the long run. You see, it only seeks to drive others further and further away from God. And once they realize the cold truth. And that being said, I think that we could account a tally mark for one of Jesus' warnings of, be aware that you are not led astray. For many will come in my name and say, I am he. And that the time is near, but do not go after them. And I'm pretty sure if Jesus Christ really did come back, he wouldn't stay in just Miami, Florida. Unless, of course, he really liked South Beach, I guess. I don't know. I'll have to ask Jesus one day. Who knows? But in addition to this, for years, and I mean years, people have concerned themselves with what they believe to be the end times, or Christ's return and when that will actually take place. Regardless, I see no problem with one being curious and intrigued by this matter. Even if someone were to devote a little bit of their time to it, that's fine, and I wouldn't consider it that big of a deal. But when one concerns a good majority of their free time with trying to figure out exactly when this might occur, well then we have a slight problem. Again, much like excessive buildings and furnitures and temples, if we devote too much time, concern, and worry to this, then we're neglecting other areas that could be more beneficial to the world and maybe society as a whole, were they to receive our time and effort. In fact, even worrying about this alone, most would say, is a fruitless endeavor. Meaning it does no good to worry, and that worrying, we only make ourselves sit or get distracted from the task at hand. Others even claim that worrying is just an empty emotion. Even though I personally am guilty of this from time to time, I try to avoid it when I can, as worrying just makes things worse sometimes. So the latter portions of Jesus' warnings in today's passage are a little sterner and kind of carry with them a very sobering sentiment. You see, in addition to the wars and insurrections and nation versus nation and kingdom versus kingdom language, we're also informed that there will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and plagues, and there will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven. And now our kind of humanly curious side wonders what these signs and dreadful portents might actually be. But much like the return of Christ, it does no good to really worry about them or wonder when they might exactly occur. Only that we should be mindful of them and know and be aware that they will, in fact, eventually happen. And now one might think that those are all the four warnings that Christ would offer, but lucky for us, no, he had more warnings for us. Isn't that wonderful and very nice of him? I think so. So on top of what Jesus has already named, the very real possibility of being arrested or persecuted, of being handed over to the synagogues or prisons and brought before kings and governors, is also very probable. And if all of that wasn't bad enough, we're also informed that we will be betrayed by parents, brothers and sisters and relatives and friends, and that some of them may even put us to death. We will also be hated by all because of Christ's name, but not a hair on our head will perish. I talk about intimidating. Now I bet some of you may be wondering too, if I'm bald, does that mean that really doesn't apply to me? No, don't worry, you're still safe if you're bald. It's just a figure of speech, so don't freak out too much. But we can rest assured that the true message of the gospel, and if we're to live that out, it will result in lost relationships and can be difficult for others to swallow if they too do not believe. Now I realize a lot of this stuff from Jesus may be a lot and hard to digest. You see, all of this just to say that what is most critical of these intimidating and downright scary notions and scenarios is the reassurance that we are given by God. And talk about reassuring indeed. But just when we figure it out to be left for dead, or to fend for ourselves and face all of these daunting challenges all by our lonesome, we are reminded that God will be with us. Yet again, we do not need to worry. We shouldn't worry about the glitz and the glamour of our buildings, or we shouldn't worry when exactly Christ will return. And we shouldn't worry about where or when our persecution may come. In fact, while attending a Presbyterian meeting a few years ago, there was a speaker that offered up this portion of advice. And I'm not sure if he quoted another source or citation, so if I misquoted, I apologize. But this is where I heard it. I heard it at the Presbyterian meeting. The person got up and said, "Do not worry about yesterday, for it is history. And do not worry about tomorrow, for it is a mystery. Instead, enjoy today, for it is a gift. And that's why we call it the present." So that's a very kind of solid piece of advice for me. And one that I'm sure Jesus himself would even endorse. And so with all of these understandings and statements, we can see just how critical it is that we listen to and heed the warnings of Jesus Christ. Will we make mistakes along the way? Of course. We're human, right? Just as I told the children this morning. But being prepared can go a very long way to helping us protect against and limit those very mistakes. And so what we need to take away with us today when we leave worship and go home and ponder about the sermon for 4 hours in the afternoon, like I know all of you do, right? We can think that we should avoid doing things in excess. That's how I got my gout, right? Now, people have always said that too much of a good thing is never a good thing. So the same applies to how we invest our own time, our effort, and our money. Are we good stewards with it? Investing our own time and money into critical ministries and the lives of other people? Or do we contemplate and worry about inconsequential matters? I'm sure Jesus Christ would tell us, not worry, my beloved children, but trust that I am always with you. And that, my friends, is very reassuring. Amen.